Hi there guys, it's Lester here. Welcome to Hypnotherapy Unleashed. Now today, we're going to learn exactly what causes depression and anxiety, but more importantly, what we can do about it. Now the reason I thought I'd do a video like this is because very often when we're suffering from depression and anxiety, I've been a clinical hypnotherapist for about 6 years now, and I used to suffer from it myself. So everything I'm going to be talking about in this video comes from direct experience, as well as working with about over 300 clients now. But the reason it's so important to address, I was speaking to my friend the other day about this, about the film The Blair Witch Project. And that just seemed to skyrocket in terms of popularity. And people still find it to be an excruciatingly scary film. And the reason for that is because you can't actually see the monster that's behind the camera. No one really knows what that scary thing is. And I found the exact same thing to be the same with depression and anxiety. That very often, if you look at any horror film that's ever been made, the scariest parts of that film isn't when you see the monster, it's the terror as to what that could be. And normally, 9 times out of 10, when you end up seeing the monster, it's never really as scary as you thought it could have been. So the moment that you really know what depression and anxiety actually is, that's the moment that we can start to do something about it. And actually 9 times out of 10, the fear of that depression and anxiety gets significantly reduced. So let's start and talk about what it is. I'm going to be drawing a few diagrams in this video, and I'm just going to tell you now, I'm a much better hypnotherapist than I am an artist. So we'll keep flashing up these different drawings just so you can really get your head around what it is that I'm talking about here. So let's start with a picture of the brain. Now that's as good as it's going to get. I'm sorry. It's a circle. It's a sheet with no legs. But there's a very important part of the brain that we really want to be using when we're conquering this feeling of depression and anxiety. Chances are it's the part of the brain that you're using right now to watch this video. And it's the part that's clearly shown in this diagram here. And this is the left frontal cortex. It's the part of the brain that you use to be using your mobile. It's the part of the brain that you're using to generally feel positive. It's the part of the brain that you use when you're having conversations with other people. Now, we're not going to get stuck into the actual jargon, the neuroscience here today, because the things that I want you to take from this video are practical applications in your day-to-day life. So when we're operating from this part of the brain, we could say that technically it's attached to a vast intellectual resource, which is the neocortex. So if we're operating from that part of the brain, generally we tend to be more successful in our actions. And the reason for that is because we're seeing things as they are in that moment and not worse than they are, which is exactly what happens when we're feeling those feelings of depression and anxiety. But there's another part of the brain. Almost you could say it's where the source of this depression and anxiety starts. It's where all the juicy stuff that we kind of want to have control of happens. And it's the part here. Now, the technical name for that would be the limbic system. But generally there's a central part which it holds a very particular part of the brain called the amygdala, and it's the health and safety officer of your brain. Now, this is the part that we generally share with most animals, certainly all mammals, because it is on all the time. Even if you're just walking left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, it's constantly just being on alert to see, are there any obstacles in my path? What's that behind the wall? And so there's a few qualities that this part of the brain has, especially when it's being utilized actively, and I'm sure they'll all be very, very familiar to you. So something that we forget about, and it's probably the most important fact of our species, yet when we're driving around in cars or we're walking through buildings, we always forget it, is that we have the exact same brains and bodies of hunter, gatherer, nomads, old cavemen, cave women from around about 10,000 years ago plus, for the last 200,000 years. So a lot of people say, but Les, we've been in agricultural societies for 10,000 years. And at first you'd think that's a really long time, right? But the truth is that that's really only 5% of the times that we've had these brains and bodies. So 95% of everything that your body has been wired to do, every sort of neuron in your brain has been constructed to react to, is for a society that existed more than 10,000 years ago. And so if hypothetically I went and I opened the door to a room and there was a saber-toothed tiger there, what do you think would happen? Well, you'd stop using this particular part of the brain that sees things as they are, and you'd suddenly be hijacked by that health and safety officer. Suddenly your heartbeat would start to speed up, your stomach would do that weird churning feeling, your palms would start to sweat, and you'd be off like a shot, right? Now, I'm sure as I say this, some of those symptoms are going to be very, very familiar to you. Because the truth is that, yeah, in that scenario, where you open the door and there's a saber-toothed tiger there, that's the exact response you want to have, right? But we have the exact same response when we're having that conversation with our partner that we know we don't want to have, when we know we have to make that decision that could potentially change our financial futures, when we're just worried about what people are thinking of us. So we've got the same kind of system that's going on that was really, really helpful 10,000 plus years ago when we were in more danger. And that's just reacting the exact same way into normal day-to-day lives. And there's normally 3 parameters as to which that health and safety officer works in. Now, this doesn't mean that you necessarily have to have these 3 things, but it doesn't mean that your brain doesn't work within these parameters. Now, one of them, chances are you're going to be in this place a lot because otherwise you wouldn't be watching this video, and that's depression. The other one would be anxiety, and the third one would be anger. Now, if we're having a really bad day, like I'm sure we will have, then we'd be operating within all those 3 parameters. Now, the reason I say you don't necessarily have to have depression to be within that parameter is because there's going to be some days where you wake up and you've just got low mood. There's going to be some days where you wake up and you think, oh, I would do anything just to stay under the covers for another 10 minutes. Well, that sense of hibernation mode, that could be within the parameter of depression. You know, if we were to look at this maybe 14,000 years ago, when the caveman or cavewoman would look out the cave and there was snow. As I film this, there's some snow outside right now, but if you could imagine that we go outside the cave and there was snow or ice or danger, what do you think this health and safety officer would make us do? We'd automatically go back into the cave, wouldn't we? And we'd pull the rug over our head. We wouldn't interact with anyone until the situation changed. You can actually see how those kind of old ways of living, that old parameter, would be sort of converted into today's modern society. If you go back in the jungle in those days, with all the danger around, all the different snakes that could be in trees, you could imagine that we'd be in that extra hypervigilant response, wouldn't we? Automatically we'd be looking for all the things that could potentially harm us. We'd be in this heightened state of alertness. And anger, and this blew me away when I first learned this, anger is just a primitive way to increase our strength, to defend ourselves against, wild tribesmen, other animals that could be predators. And so we've got this old systems way of thinking that helped us really survive 10,000 plus years ago. And we've still got those same parameters going in us now. And, I don't know why you haven't seen any saber-toothed tigers around. And so we can have the exact same systems of thinking, and we're just converting this into, I suppose, modern day symptoms. So this part is really important here because there's going to be a few things that we need to know about this health and safety officer. And when I share this with people, they can be blown away because I've had people burst into tears saying, Les, all this time I thought there was something wrong with me. I know 10 plus years ago, when I was in that particular place myself, I genuinely believe that I was just wired for unhappiness. That some people just go through life and they're happy and they're dandy and, there's no clouds in the sky. Whereas maybe just genetically, I was wired to be like Charlie Brown with the cloud just following me all day, every day. But when I learned about this particular part and how the amygdala, that health and safety officer, could react, it completely changed the game for me. Because there's a few things that a health and safety officer has to do to be able to be doing its job properly. And if you work in a big company or you know anyone who's trained in health and safety, you know that this is the way that they have to act in order to get the outcome that they want. Because it's really important to know that part of the brain, that amygdala, that limbic system, I'm sorry, but it just doesn't give a damn whether or not you're happy. It cares about whether you're surviving. And so here's a few qualities that might ring true for you, and this might be something that you find yourself going through more often than not most days. First quality is that it's really negative. So this part of the brain has just been wired to see everything from the worst case scenario. And if you think about it, that's quite a smart move, because hypothetically, if I went and I opened the door and there was that saber-toothed tiger there, it's 12:24 as I film this. If I was thinking positively, opened the door and saw a saber-toothed tiger, I wouldn't want to be thinking, well, it's lunchtime, so chances are it's probably already eaten. I'd want that health and safety officer to say, what's the worst thing that could happen right now? And the worst thing that could happen right now would be it's going to attack me, right? So that's why I'd suddenly get those responses of the speeded heartbeat, that fight-flight response. But not only is it negative, it's obsessive. So I guarantee, if you're watching this, or actually I just guarantee if you're human, that when you have a negative thought that just springs up, and sometimes it feels like it comes out of nowhere, right? You don't just have it once, do you? you have it over and over again, and sometimes it starts to almost feel like it turns into a loop, one that you can't get out of. And then once you're in that loop, more negative sensations come that prove that point. And what happens? We get the exact same response again, the speed up heart rate, and the sweaty palms, the churned stomach, and we're off like a shot. Now, not only is it negative, obsessive, but it's also vigilant. And again, what does a good health and safety officer do? If for some reason or another, it thinks that maybe you're in some kind of danger, it steps in to help. Very often, don't you have it where you might be just going through your day and the day's average? Very often when people suddenly feel like they have an anxiety attack, it's not something that feels like it builds up. Sometimes it just feels like it completely springs on you and comes out of nowhere, right? So what happens is the health and safety officer, it stays alert, wanting to double check, is there some sort of danger that could be on the horizon? For example, if that saber-tooth tiger followed me home, I'd want to be checking the window every 5 minutes to see if it had followed me home. That's what I mean by that obsessive, vigilant behavior. Now, what's really, really interesting, and this is probably our greatest gift and our greatest weakness as humans, is that you can't tell the difference between fiction and reality. 99 times out of 100, I guarantee, if you're suffering from some sort of depression or anxiety, it's very rarely about something that's happening in the present moment, right? Very often, if we're feeling depressed, not always, but normally it's because we're suddenly reimagining something that happened in the past. And so, logically, we know we could be in a safe room, but there's another part of our brain that's just wandered off, and it's imagining the worst thing that happened in the past, and yet our body's able to completely and utterly relive that again. 99 times out of 100, if we're feeling anxious, normally it's about something in the future, where we're simulating, the conversation that we have to have with our work colleague tomorrow. And we've simulated it going wrong. We've simulated it going wrong probably about 50, 60 times. Now, what ends up happening is we might go to work on a Monday morning, have that conversation that we dreaded to have, and it just went absolutely fine. But the whole problem, though, is not all of your brain, not all of your body had that one conversation. Chances are you had it 51 times and one went great, 50 were total disasters. And so what do you think will happen the next time that you have to do something similar to that? Lo and behold, the brain remembers what it had to do 50 times versus the one, and you go through the whole system again. And so I don't know if you've ever seen nature programs with David Attenborough. I'm a huge fan. And whenever you see that prey being chased by a predator, I'm always just praying that the prey will be able to get away. And sometimes, occasionally when it does, if it's like a deer that's being chased, if you've ever watched any of these shows, you'll notice that something very particular happens. That animal will stop and it will suddenly shake itself out, won't it? And then it will just carry on with its day. But we as humans don't do that. What we do instead is we go through that event and then our brain decides to relive that event over and over again, lo and behold, so we end up having all these stress hormones stuck within our body and we're not releasing them. And so when we ask ourselves, well, what actually causes this? Guys, this response is going to sound really, really cheesy, but it's so true. And that's negative thinking. And if we really, really look at events, we know that it's not necessarily the event that causes that perception of crisis. Because if that were the case, wouldn't every single student have a panic attack? Wouldn't every single doctor who'd maybe had a bad operation not go in the next day? So we know it's not necessarily the event that causes that crisis, but our perception to it. Now, again, unlike other animals, we begin to just go through these loops and we begin to just store it and store it and store it until it overflows. And so I hope that started to give you an idea of what actually caused that depression and anxiety. Because the biggest thing that I knew I had to overcome was the understanding that it wasn't just the way I was naturally wired. There was some sort of feedback that my body and my brain was giving me that was really only helpful 10,000 plus years ago. And so the chances are, if you've just been imagining the worst thing over and over again, that's the kind of attitude that could begin to cause this. Now, hopefully that gives you a little bit of clarity of what's actually going on in the brain when that happens. And I'm going to dedicate sort of the next several videos within this series to being able to really show you what it is that we can do about it. Because understanding the problem and being able to see it for what it is wonderful. But at the same time, that's only step one. And really we want to be able to look at how it is that we can actually go about solving that. So I hope this has given you some of that clarity as to what's actually going on and why it is that we can do something about that. So if you've enjoyed this video and you feel like you've been able to get some sort of clarity as to what's actually going on in those moments, give us a like and a subscribe, and look at all the hypnotherapy videos that we've been doing, because they've been showing, well, not only through the last 6 years of me doing this one-to-one with people, but from the comments that we've been getting from other people, this is something that's really been helping people make those shifts in their own life. And comment below to tell me what it is that you got most out of this video that resonated with you. So have a fantastic day, guys. Speak soon. Bye.